Good evening and welcome back. Bull Like a Leopard here, and I want you first to hit that like button and share the video because we're going to be doing a lot of these videos. So we're doing another candidate profile today. There are currently these following candidates that are either in the race or have formed exploratory committees. So Julian Castro, we covered him last time. He is declared for the candidacy. John Delaney from Maryland is declared. Tulsi Gabbard, covered in the first video, declared. Kirsten Gillibrand, who we're going to cover today, declared an exploratory committee. And we also have Kamala Harris, who we'll probably cover next week. Richard Ojeda, who declared in November after losing his run for Congress. And then there's incumbent Donald Trump, the lone Republican at the moment, and Elizabeth Warren, who still has only an exploratory committee. So let's get into some of the issues with Kirsten Gillibrand. What are some of the advantages with her, and why we should be watching out for her in the 2020 presidential election field. Okay, so one of the things that kind of makes me a little excited to talk about Kirsten Gillibrand, not because I'm going to vote for her, which is almost impossible to conceive of right now, but I watch the Styx Hexenhammer channel pretty faithfully, and I would say that he speaks of her a lot as one of the more promising candidates because of some of the traits that she has. She's a little bit of a crossover between the progressive and the centrist, kind of what he calls the missing link. And she would probably be able to communicate with people very well. And let's talk about why that could be. So here are some of the issues where, some of the things that have cropped up in her early career. She claims to have learned Mandarin while studying in Beijing in the 1980s while at Dartmouth. So I haven't found any clips of her speaking Mandarin or any other Chinese dialect or language group, but that's one of the things that is put on her profile. It could be that she's lost her, what do you call it, her faculty in Mandarin because she hasn't used it. But whatever. She used to intern for Senator Al D'Amato, who ironically was a Republican in New York. That was in the early 90s. She got her law degree from UCLA, and she was a defense attorney at Philip Morris in the 90s. She also was special counsel to Secretary of HUD Andrew Cuomo. But in the late 90s, once she'd become ensconced in the Clinton administration for who Cuomo served, she joined the Clinton U.S. Senate campaign in 1999 and helped, First Lady Clinton win that seat in 2000. Now, it should be noted that that campaign was pretty notorious for all the advantages that Hillary Clinton got through her connections to her husband. For example, many of the intelligence agencies were able to supply her with more detailed information about some of the foreign policy issues than her opponent, who was just some random Long Island congressman. So then in 2006, she was nominated and won a congressional district in New York State. That was the 20th district. Now that district is in Albany, which is in upstate New York, and that is kind of the rub here. So when she was running for Congress, Gillibrand did have to project a little more of a centrist and even conservative message, because in upstate New York, the politics and social values are, in many ways very different from downstate New York, the Long Island and New York City and Staten Island. So this is from the American Conservative from April 2009. It says, when Democrats swept into the House in 2006, their new majority was constructed by moderates like Kirsten Gillibrand. Like many freshman Democrats that year, she campaigned against corruption. Her opponent, incumbent John Sweeney, was tangled in a lobbyist scandal, and his wife had filed a police report alleging abuse. Gillibrand won her upstate New York district by running to the right. She campaigned against amnesty for illegal immigrants, promised to restore fiscal responsibility to Washington, and pledged to protect gun rights. After winning by 6 points, she joined the conservative-leaning Blue Dog Coalition. So this is something I was just seeing, and I find it very surprising for Gillibrand, who nowadays is considered much more of a liberal, and especially since she happens to have been a former Clinton acolyte. And here it says, Gillibrand kept her word. In her first term, she voted against McCain-hatched immigration reform, assailed Bush's bailouts, and received a perfect 100% rating from the NRA. She crushed her Republican challenger by 24 points in 2008 and bragged that her voting record was one of the most conservative in the state. Now, after her surprise appointment to fill Hillary Clinton's vacant Senate seat, liberals in the media and her party, even in her expanding staff, are determined to teach this blue dog new tricks. So what I'm getting as an impression from this is that Gillibrand is sort of the same type of candidate as Connor Lamb, who was running for a seat in Pennsylvania in 2017, or it might have even been in 2018 during one of the special elections. Connor Lamb is a pro-gun Democrat, kind of a center-right person, and he pretty much won that district due to his running as somebody who's breaking from the Pelosi agenda as opposed to joining it. So once Gillibrand got into the Senate, there was this effort to bring her closer to the line of the rest of the Republican Party. In a much-noted editorial, the New York Times asked, can she represent a constituency beyond the narrow politics of her district, where she has been a bullet-headed opponent of gun control, proudly basking in extremist affections? Columnist Maureen Dowd lamented, so now we have an NRA handmaiden in Bobby Kennedy's old seat. So that's the type of hyperbole you're going to talk about, because they want to bring up Bobby Kennedy, who was murdered in Los Angeles, not in New York. Cranes called her votes against the financial services bailouts politically expedient and said that she should be disqualified from serving in office. So that's pretty much the Gillibrand that was elected to the Senate. Or another pitfall of the Kirsten Gillibrand candidacy would be her role in the Me Too movement. Now, the issue here is that during that whole saga, which is technically still ongoing, Kirsten Gillibrand took kind of a leading role in the movement, including calling for the resignation of Minnesota Senator Al Franken. And therefore, in many circles, she's seen, even among Democrats, as somebody who is a little too overzealous. And I think that her desire to step away from the previous conservative brand that she had much earlier in her career might have been a motivating factor for her to step out so vehemently in favor of Franken's resignation. I mean, of course, there could be some personal conviction there. But then the Kavanaugh hearings came about, and whereas with Al Franken there was photo evidence of him apparently, I guess you could say, groping a woman on a flight, with Kavanaugh she had to make the case that she believed the accuser, Christine Blasey Ford, who was claiming that Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted her. So here she is at a rally with Amy Schumer.
The moment about all of you.
Undermining our country.
All of you are speaking truth to power because you care about the future. You care about our children. You care about who is leading this country and who sits at the highest court in the land. I read the reports today.
And they're fine.
It was not intended to get to the bottom of this. It was not intended to find the truth. It was intended to be a cover. A cover for those who don't want to look at the truth.
That's a lie.
You've seen the news reports. You know from the news reports from their lawyers that many people who had corroborating information were not interviewed as part of this investigation. This investigation was not thorough. It was not complete,
Six
and it
FBI
did not get to the
investigations.
bottom of what
40
happened and
years.
who Judge Kavanaugh is.
Bogus!
And based on what so many people have said, have called out to give their truth, their facts, their relevant information, we know that Judge Kavanaugh was not honest when he came to the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Emily and I just wanted to thank you all so much for showing up today. That's what we're going to do. We're going to keep showing up. And no matter how this goes, they cannot keep us down. We will win.
So that's also Emily Ratajkowski behind her. So is this a positive look for Kirsten Gillibrand? Among people who are Democratic voters, who are consistently Democratic, especially people in her home state and perhaps in states like California or Oregon or Washington or Massachusetts, yes, absolutely. But I think that given the passage of time and in light of recent events, not just with Kavanaugh, but of course we just went through the Covington kids, a lot of people are now starting to question this whole presumption of guilt. So the news media has repeatedly made these assertions that certain people have been guilty of certain indiscretions, crimes, behaviors without having established the burden of proof. Okay, so the problem with that is that Kirsten Gillibrand is, in fact, a defense attorney. And for her to go and claim that Brett Kavanaugh was lying and that he was not forthcoming, it would belie her own previous career, which was as a defense attorney for tobacco lobbyists who perjured themselves in front of Congress. All right, so what are we supposed to make of Kirsten Gillibrand's actual candidacy in terms of policy? So she is vehemently pro-choice. She opposed the Wicker Amendment in 2009 that would deny funding to the UN for population control policies. She also voted yes on additional money for stimulus spending in 2009. That would be in order to bail out Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and a number of the other. I think Ginnie Mae was the one most specifically dealt with in that one. She supported gay marriage, and she voted yes on cash for clunkers. So I would define Kirsten Gillibrand as pretty much the classical Democratic liberal. Somebody of the same mold as an Obama or a Hillary Clinton, who's basically her mentor, or even somebody like, one of those 80s Democrats, such as Walter Mondale or Joe Biden, for example, he may be climbing into the race as well. The fact of the matter is that Kirsten Gillibrand is somebody capable of saying the things that are compelling for the right Democratic audience. But that's not the type of candidacy that would draw in people that have been alienated from the Democratic Party over the past few years, whether you're talking about progressive people on the left who were alienated during the 2016 convention and the primaries and the issues with, of course, the DNC and Donna Brazile and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the way that Bernie Sanders was screwed. Those people I don't believe are really going to latch on to somebody like Kirsten Gillibrand. It may be a few of them. So I think she can only count on drawing a very small proportion of that group. Then there would probably be a lot of the Obama supporters may choose to opt for her as opposed to Kamala Harris, who has a number of similar policy positions as well as some of the same flaws. But I would say that Kirsten Gillibrand of the two is simply the more likable person if you listen to them speak. I think Kamala Harris really does rub people the wrong way. And we're going to get to that during the Kamala Harris video, which will probably come out next week. However, if you're talking about people who are from the other side of the aisle, people that would be swing voters who did vote for Donald Trump in 2016, I don't think that Kirsten Gillibrand is necessarily somebody who provides a great advantage. And I'll tell you about that in a second. But I'd also like to point out that her statements about Kavanaugh, about perjury, about Donald Trump, they don't carry a lot of weight in my mind and in the minds of people who are talking about consistency. Because as I mentioned previously in this video, she was a big tobacco attorney. She was a defense attorney for big tobacco. And in the 90s, these were her one of the people, the head of, I believe it was R.J. Reynolds or Philip Morris, was being represented by her firm in New York, and she took money to do that. So this is what they said about the addictive properties of nicotine.
Let me begin my questioning on the matter of whether or not nicotine is addictive. Let me ask you first, and I'd like to just go down the row, whether each of you believes that nicotine is not addictive. I heard virtually all of you touch on it, and just yes or no. Do you believe nicotine is not addictive?
I believe nicotine is not addictive, yes.
Mr. Johnston.
Congressman, cigarettes and nicotine clearly do not meet the classic definitions of addiction. There is no intoxication.
We'll take that as a no, and again, time is short. If you could just, I think each of you believe nicotine is not addictive. We just would like to have this for the record.
I don't believe that nicotine or our products are addictive.
I believe nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
And I too believe that nicotine is not addictive.
All right. Dr. Campbell, I assume that you're aware that your testimony, and you said in your testimony that nicotine is not addictive, is contradicted by an overwhelming number of authorities and associations. For example, in 1988, the Surgeon General of the United States wrote an entire report on this topic. The Surgeon General, of course, is the chief health advisor to our government. I assume you have reviewed that report?
Yes, I have, sir.
All right.
Okay, so you saw in that testimony before Congress with Representative Wyden, who's now the senator from Oregon, you saw the 7 dwarves, the 7 chief executives of America's biggest tobacco companies. They lied under oath about the addictive qualities of nicotine. Now, at the time, they could get away, they could weasel away with saying, well, I don't believe that tobacco is addictive. However, they could only make that statement if they could say, well, we never tried to see if it's addictive or not. And unfortunately for them, there was a person who in a few years later did testify before a court of law that they'd lied about it. His name was Jeffrey Wigan. He was featured in a movie called The Insider starring Russell Crowe. But here's his statement.
Chronic lung disease.
But if cigarette smoking is so deadly, why is it so popular?
A cigarette is an elegant form of a drug delivery device, almost like a hypodermic syringe and needle. And the delivery that one wants out of a cigarette is nicotine.
Nicotine may be the addictive product, but other cigarette components that accompany it are actually more lethal.
So that's what you have to know about Kirsten Gillibrand at the moment, and at least according to my opinion, okay? Kirsten Gillibrand is a person who is basically the dream of corporate America and its Democratic partners, okay? And I want to say that not because I'm biased, it's just a fact. She used to be a corporate attorney for Big Tobacco, for Philip Morris. That's something you can't run away from. If you're a progressive, I don't think that you'd probably support that. I don't think a lot of Americans would support that. I think that there is broad criticism for Big Tobacco in America. But in a larger sense, there is an issue with Kirsten Gillibrand that I think will start to come up, which is, first of all, her connections to the Clintons. Second of all, would be the fact that amongst Trump supporters, she will probably be seen as just a dishonest person, both because of examples like her supporting or basically representing clients that perjured themselves, as well as a lot of her very mendacious attitudes. You know, she ran for Congress originally as a pro-gun senator, as a pro-gun congresswoman, wanted to be a congresswoman she joined the Blue Dog Democrats. Now she's very, very strictly anti-gun. This is somebody who will, in all likelihood, become just swallowed up in the field, because there's not a lot that sets her apart necessarily from a candidate like Joe Biden, apart from the fact that she's a woman. There's not much that separates her from Kamala Harris, except for the fact that Harris happens to be black/Indian, as well as Gillibrand happens to be white. And you will probably see, as the election season starts to come closer and closer, Miss Gillibrand, Senator Gillibrand, I should say, she's going to have to take positions that in the past she was not necessarily comfortable talking about. She is probably going to have to come out in favor of Medicare for all, even though, and she might have already done so. I would have to check on that. But in the past, she's never really committed much to that policy. She will probably have to commit to some sort of climate tax, okay, the carbon tax. She will also probably have to pander to the Green New Deal people, which goes along with that. She's going to have to support major gun control legislation on the federal level. She's going to have to basically pander to all of the issues that progressives and liberals on the left will support, but that in the past she didn't necessarily want to burn any bridges over. Now she's going to have to burn a lot of bridges with the center over this, and that would be a problem going into the general election. Donald Trump could easily take advantage of that. And I want to point something else out, which I was about to forget. And I don't want this to be the main message of the video, but it should be remembered. The Democratic Party has not had somebody elected president who is from the North and a white person since John F. Kennedy. Okay, think about it this way, okay? Their nominees since 1960, when Kennedy ran, are Lyndon Johnson, who is a Southern white guy. They had in 1968 Hubert Humphrey, a Northern white guy from Minnesota, lost. In 1972, they had George McGovern from South Dakota, I believe. He lost by the worst margin of all time. Now, the question is South Dakota part of the North, or is it? That's kind of besides the point. 1976, Jimmy Carter, nominated by the Democrats. He was a white Southerner. 1980, he loses. Then in 1984, you have Mondale, Walter Mondale, Northerner from Minnesota, white guy, loses. 1988, Michael Dukakis, Massachusetts, white guy, loses. 1992, Bill Clinton, Southern white guy, wins. 1996, wins again. 2000, Al Gore, yes, he's from Tennessee. He's a Southern white guy. He happened to lose. Some Democrats would say he won, right? Most Democrats would say he won. 2004, John Kerry, Northern white guy, loses by a pretty embarrassing margin. And then you have Barack Obama, and then, of course, Hillary Clinton, another Northern person, Northern white woman, loses. So this is a pattern. I don't want this to be the main focus because, as I said, the policies, I think, are what would probably do Kirsten Gillibrand in. But she will not be relatable as a New Yorker, as basically a high-powered corporate attorney her entire life. She cannot go to a state like she can go to Minnesota. So those states, yes, they are northern states, but she is not a Midwestern working class person. She happened to have gone to a school that was all girls in upstate New York. So that was she came from an upper class upbringing. She went to, I believe, Dartmouth, an upper class college, an Ivy League college, UCLA law. She's not relatable to the middle American. I don't even care whether it's a white or a black or Mexican person at all. She's not a relatable person to the common American voter. That's what I would say. And I think in that respect, she's almost exactly a carbon copy of all the problems that Hillary Clinton has in terms of image, if not the shady records on, all sorts of disgusting things that they've done with their past. So that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this candidate profile of Kirsten Gillibrand. And I did want to be fair. I think she would be a very, eloquent candidate. I think she would probably bring a lot of personal skills to the table that some of the other candidates would not. But I don't see it happening. So please like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and also find me on CocoScope, BitChute,